Born in Alexandria, Egypt, into a Christian family, her life was shaped by deep family values and faith. From a young age, she was raised by her family in the Christian faith and taught love within the community, where spiritual life played an essential role. When she was about 7 years old, family immigrated to Canada in search of a better life. There, she began to adjust to a new life, where the culture and environment were far different from the homeland of Egypt. Growing up in a new country, she never forgot the values and traditions she had been taught since childhood. Despite the modern and open environment in Canada, she held steadfast to her faith in God and her connection to the Christian community. However, the challenges of being an immigrant in a new country made life for her and her family difficult. Adapting to the new culture wasn't easy, but with determination and family support, she gradually felt that she belonged there. As years passed, she entered adulthood and met Paul, first husband. Paul was a charming man, always appearing strong and confident. At first, she was attracted to his self-assured manner and the promising words of a happy life together. She trusted him, believing that her marriage would be filled with joy and mutual support. However, it didn't take long for her to realize that Paul was not the husband she had expected. Paul was egotistical, with the traits of a psychological manipulator, controlled every aspect of her life, from financial decisions to personal relationships. Initially, she tried to adapt, thinking that every marriage had its challenges. But over time, she realized that Paul was not just a demanding husband. He had completely controlled and paralyzed her spirit. Her personal freedom was gradually suffocated, and her life became a series of anxious and pressured days. Throughout the 13 years of her marriage to Paul, she endured countless suffering and challenges. She tried to maintain the marriage for the sake of her children and family. Each day became more stifling. After many years of enduring, she decided to break free from the miserable marriage. She sought legal help and eventually was granted a restraining order against Paul. This was a major turning point in her life, and after the restraining order took effect, she felt as if she had just escaped from a psychological prison in which she had been confined for many years. Emerging from the marriage with her 2 beautiful children, Pauline and Andrew, she began to rebuild her life. Despite facing emotional wounds, she moved forward, believing that she could find happiness and peace. The divorce freed her from Paul's grip, but it also left deep scars in her soul. Her life entered a new chapter when she met Sam, her second husband. The astonishing part was that Sam was not a stranger. He was her first love from her youth. Their reunion after many years seemed like fate, and they quickly rekindled their past relationship. They decided to marry, and this marriage was entirely different from the first. Sam loved and cared for her, and for 9 years they lived happily together. He was someone she could trust, and she finally felt like she had found true love. Time passed, and everything seemed calm and happy, but this marriage also didn't last forever. Differences in life and the pressures of modern life gradually pulled them apart. Although there was no intense conflict like in her previous marriage, they both agreed that divorce was the best option for both of them. They decided to end their marriage peacefully and without any conflict. All the divorce procedures went smoothly, and they agreed to part ways amicably. However, before separating, Sam requested to stay in the house for about 3 weeks to find a new place to live. With kindness and understanding, she agreed, but not long after, everything began to change in an unexpected direction. Just a few days after agreeing to let Sam stay, she started feeling unwell. Her entire body ached, and strange symptoms began to appear. She thought it was just the common flu, but her condition worsened. She felt exhausted, experienced severe headaches, and couldn't move without intense pain. These symptoms quickly became severe enough that she had to ask Sam to take her to the emergency center. At the clinic, the The doctors believed she had the flu and prescribed pain relief medication, advising her to rest. However, the headaches didn't subside. Instead, they worsened. Every blink felt like a piercing pain through her brain, making it unbearable. January 8, 2008 became a day she would never forget. Pain continued to torment her body and mind. While driving on the highway, she suddenly had an unprecedented vision. In that moment, she saw a family funeral, but the one missing from the vision was her brother, Steve. Steve, who was disabled from birth, was living in Egypt with another brother. She immediately thought this was a warning from God that her brother was about to die, and she needed to go see him immediately. In a panic, she planned to leave and fly to Egypt that weekend. She arranged her work, met with employees to delegate responsibilities, and ensured everything would run smoothly in her absence. However, the headaches continued to torment her, and during a meeting the pain became unbearable. She had to clutch her head, trying to suppress the feeling that her head was about to explode. Suddenly, while struggling with the pain, she heard a powerful and clear voice telling her to stop everything, drop all thoughts, and leave immediately. It was a divine guidance she had never experienced. With an overwhelming sense of urgency, she left the office immediately and drove home without a second thought. On the way home, the voice spoke again, even more clearly this time. This was not just a fleeting thought or a coincidence. She realized she was being spoken to by the Holy Spirit, something she had never experienced before. This voice was unlike anything she had ever heard. Though she had always communicated with Jesus and the Father, she had never truly understood the Holy Spirit or felt His presence in her life. But this time, she knew without a doubt that it was Him. Though she didn't fully understand why He was speaking to her at that moment, she couldn't ignore the voice. He told her to remain silent, not to tell anyone what was happening in her mind. She felt a strong urge to speak out. The voice stopped her. After leaving the office, her headache continued to torment her, but the powerful and clear voice of the Holy Spirit made her decide without hesitation. When she arrived home, all she wanted was to find a place to rest. Sam, her second husband, greeted her as she walked through the door. He immediately asked, "Did you book the tickets? Are we leaving tomorrow or Sunday?" She couldn't give a clear answer at that moment because the headache had paralyzed all her thoughts. She simply responded that she hadn't made a decision yet and needed more time to think. Her daughter, Colleen, about 14 years old at the time, came out of her room, concerned, and asked if her mother was okay. She reassured her daughter that everything was fine, but deep inside, she knew that wasn't true. After changing into more comfortable clothes, she went into the kitchen and leaned against the refrigerator without any appetite. At that moment, the Holy Spirit spoke to her again with something peculiar. "My child, turn around, open the fridge, and eat yogurt with rice." This confused her because yogurt with rice was a common dish in Egypt, but she didn't think the Holy Spirit would be concerned with such trivial details. Nevertheless, she followed the instructions, and as she sat down to eat, Holy Spirit continued to speak to her. Strangely enough, He didn't only talk about significant matters, but even made jokes, which made her laugh. Pain was still there, but the Holy Spirit's presence eased the worries in her heart. After finishing her meal, she went to bed with a strange feeling that something important was about to happen. As she lay in bed, questions about the meaning of these events began to fill her mind. She still didn't understand why the Holy Spirit had chosen her, why He kept speaking to her at this time. But before she could think any further, another message from the Holy Spirit came. "My child, it's not your brother who is going to die. It's you." Those words struck her like lightning, leaving her in shock. Her heart felt heavy, and she wasn't ready to face the reality that death was near. All she could think about was Colleen, daughter, who would have to face the heartbreaking reality of losing her mother. In her despair, she remembered a dream she had many years ago. In that dream, she saw Jesus walking with her 2 children, Andrew and Colleen. Jesus embraced the 2 children, and the 3 of them laughed and talked happily. At the time, she didn't think much of this dream, but now, with the Holy Spirit's reminder, she realized that the dream was a prophecy for the future. This gave her some comfort, knowing that Jesus was ready to take care of her children. As she recalled the dream, she began to accept that death might not be as frightening as she once thought. She felt more at peace, knowing that God would protect her children, and she started to mentally prepare for the journey ahead. Just as she felt relief, the Holy Spirit spoke to her again. "You will go on a journey, but you will come back. You will become my messenger." These words gave her hope. She wouldn't have to leave life forever. She would return to continue her mission. The Holy Spirit didn't stop there. He asked her to do something that seemed simple, but was incredibly difficult. Stop thinking. She tried, but as soon as she thought she had stopped thinking, her mind would wonder if she was still thinking. This loop kept repeating, and she couldn't truly stop, but the Holy Spirit was patient, guiding her to relax and gradually cease all thoughts. After a long time, she finally achieved a state of calm and stopped thinking. Once she reached this quiet state, the Holy Spirit gave a new command. "Close your eyes and do not open them, no matter what happened." His words were full of authority and clarity, making her understand that something significant was about to happen. She immediately complied, closing her eyes and trying not to open them, no matter what occurred around her. As soon as she closed her eyes, a brilliant light filled the room, unlike any light she had ever seen. It wasn't just a physical light, it carried an invisible presence. She could feel that it was the presence of God the Father. The light was powerful and illuminated the entire room. She didn't dare open her eyes to look. Next, the window beside her began to shake violently, as if an earthquake had struck the room. While the light shone brightly and the window shook, her heart began to race faster and stronger. Pounding in her chest was so intense that she felt like it was about to burst. Fear began to creep in, and as soon as that fear surfaced, the entire process stopped. The light vanished, the window stopped shaking, and her heart returned to a normal rhythm. She realized that fear had interrupted this divine process. The Holy Spirit remained patient with her, saying, "You cannot ruin this. Calm down and we will begin again." She tried to relax and followed his instructions once more. The process started over from the beginning. The light returned, the window shook, and her heart began to beat rapidly again. This time, she didn't let fear control her, and the process continued uninterrupted. She experienced everything without any worry or fear. Finally, when the process ended, the Holy Spirit said something very important to her. "What you are feeling is just an inconvenience. Do not let it worry you." Immediately after he said this, she felt intense pain shoot down her legs, as if her bones were being smashed with a hammer. Pain was so overwhelming that she wanted to scream, but the Holy Spirit's words, that it was just an inconvenience, helped her stay calm. She didn't scream, didn't panic, but focused on the comforting words of the Holy Spirit. She had lived with chronic pain before, and this pain surpassed anything she had ever experienced. Yet his patience and guidance helped her endure this pain without breaking down. When the pain subsided, she realized that her body had completely lost sensation. She could no longer feel any part of her body from head to toe. This terrified her, and she asked, "Am I paralyzed?" The Holy Spirit gently replied, "Yes, you are paralyzed." Those words felt like her entire world was collapsing. She couldn't accept the reality of being paralyzed and asked if she could try moving her toes. He agreed to let her try, but no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't move. The realization that she was completely paralyzed brought her deep sorrow and despair, but the Holy Spirit continued to comfort her throughout the night. He spoke with her, answering questions she had never dared to ask. He explained the suffering in the world, why there are disasters and injustices, and in that moment, everything seemed to make sense. However, strangely, after everything was over, she couldn't clearly remember these answers. She only remembered that he had comforted her and helped her understand everything. But the specific details of the answers seemed to be erased from her memory. That night, she had clear visions of divine things, and the presence of the Holy Spirit transformed her dark night into an experience full of light and love. The physical and emotional pain no longer mattered. She was enveloped in divine love and peace, His presence. After a night filled with profound spiritual experiences, the protagonist began to feel her body was no longer the same. She woke up in the morning with the clear realization that she was completely paralyzed. She couldn't move or feel any part of her body, and this awareness left her deeply confused. However, the presence of the Holy Spirit remained with her, helping her maintain calm and not succumb to fear. The next morning, her husband, Sam, woke up and discovered her lying motionless in bed. At first, he didn't notice anything unusual, thinking she was simply sleeping deeply, but when she didn't respond to his calls, he started to worry. Sam approached her and gently shook her body, but she didn't react at all. Instead of calling for emergency help or seeking assistance, Sam's actions left her in shock. Sam began removing her jewelry, rings, bracelets, everything of value. His actions were strange, and she couldn't understand why he was doing this. She wanted to scream, to react, but her body wouldn't allow it. She was utterly helpless, only able to watch him through one barely open eye, but unable to do anything more. After taking all the jewelry, Sam walked away for a while, then returned with some pills in his hand. He tried to open her mouth to force a pill in, but her jaw was locked shut. This made it difficult for Sam, and he started crushing the pill through her clenched teeth, trying to get it into her mouth. She tasted the bitterness of the pill and realized it was Xanax. This added to her confusion, as Xanax is a sedative, and she couldn't understand why he would want to give her that early in the morning. After trying to force her to take the pill, Sam continued his baffling actions. He began undressing her, which filled her with terror. Why was he doing this while she lay motionless and unable to defend herself? In that moment, she was completely powerless, unable to stop his actions. The most horrific part came when, after undressing her, Sam raped her right there in bed while she was entirely defenseless. The physical and emotional pain blended together, making her feel like her whole world was collapsing. Yet again, the presence of the Holy Spirit came to her, and he helped her stay calm, allowing her to endure this terrifying situation. Despite the pain, she felt that her body was just a small part of her, and that her soul remained protected by God's love. After raping her, Sam left the room without saying a word. She heard the sound of water running from the bathroom as he took a shower. Everything had happened so quickly, and she couldn't believe it was real. She lay there, naked and paralyzed, but her mind was flooded with questions. Why did he do this? Why didn't he call for help? Why had he chosen to treat her like this? After finishing his shower, Sam returned to the room. He tried to lift her, but she was too heavy for him. He dropped her to the floor, and she heard the loud thud as her body hit the ground. Although she couldn't feel physical pain, her mind still felt the humiliation and helplessness. However, once again, the Holy Spirit's presence helped her endure. He told her that everything was merely an inconvenience, a term he had used to comfort her throughout this ordeal. She felt as though she was being led through a harsh spiritual lesson, but that ultimately it would lead to enlightenment and liberation. Sam continued trying to lift her, but to no avail. Eventually, He gave up and left the room, leaving her lying there in a state of immobility. She heard him walk into her daughter Colleen's room and tell her not to disturb her mother. He lied, saying that her mother had taken Xanax to relieve stress and wanted to rest. When Sam returned to the room, he began pouring cold water over her body, an action that sent her into a state of shock. The cold water felt like sharp needles piercing her skin, and she felt pain all over her body. Yet again the Holy Spirit appeared, comforting her by saying that this was just an inconvenience, and that she could endure it. In the midst of the shock, she had a vision of Jesus' hand, nailed to the cross. This vision made her feel that the pain she was experiencing was nothing compared to the sacrifice of Jesus. This helped her find comfort and strength to endure what was happening. She felt that her pain was insignificant compared to what Jesus had endured for humanity. Sam continued pouring cold water over her body, and each time he did, she saw images of Jesus and was comforted by his presence. Physical pain seemed to lose its importance, as she knew she was being protected by God's love and sacrifice. After a while, Sam stopped and left the room. She felt relief as the pain and torture temporarily ceased, but she knew her ordeal wasn't over. When Sam returned again, he didn't pour water on her, but instead began to pinch her nose shut. With her clenched jaw, she couldn't breathe through her mouth, and when he pinched her nose, she couldn't breathe at all. The sensation of suffocation overwhelmed her, and she realized she might be close to death. However, in that moment she saw Jesus again. He was standing there, hand extended, ready to lead her. She no longer felt fear or pain, only a sense of peace and a desire to follow him. As she felt that her life was about to end, she realized she was ready to let go and follow Jesus. In that final moment, she understood that all suffering and trials were temporary, and she would soon be freed from this body. But then, suddenly, she felt her body begin to breathe again. Sam was startled to see her react and released his grip. She continued to live. This time, she knew her life had changed forever. This near-death experience not only altered her perception of life and death, but also strengthened her faith in God and His divine power. After everything she had endured, protagonist felt she had passed a crucial turning point. Despite still facing paralysis and the physical torment from Sam, she began to sense a profound transformation in her spirit and soul. The near-death experience had opened a new door for her, where she clearly recognized the connection between the visible and invisible worlds. In those moments, she knew she was more than just a physical body. Her soul was wrapped and protected by God's love. Even after being abused and nearly killed by Sam, she didn't lose faith in God's protection. In fact, she felt as though she had been reborn from death, and every breath she took after that event carried a sacred meaning. The Holy Spirit continued to comfort her every moment, helping her realize that all the suffering was just part of a greater plan. After Sam left the room, she lay quietly in bed, eyes closed, trying to sense any sign of life in her body. Though she still couldn't move, she felt her soul growing stronger than ever. Questions about existence, life, and death seemed to have been answered within her, but these answers didn't need to be spoken, as they lay beyond words and could only be felt. In a half-conscious, half-dream state, she had another vision. This time, she saw herself standing in a vast green field, surrounded by colorful flowers. The space was vast and incredibly peaceful, with no signs of pain or tension. In this dream, she no longer felt heavy or helpless. She could walk freely, her steps as light as the wind. In the sky, she saw flying creatures she had never seen in real life. These beings had radiant wings with colors the earth had never witnessed. As she walked across the field, she saw her departed loved ones appear before her. First was her mother, a woman she had always respected and loved. Her mother had no specific features, but she could recognize her by the gentle light radiating from her body. They didn't need to speak. A simple glance was enough to understand everything. Her mother led her down a long path, and as they reached the end, she saw her sister Nadia emerge from a door. Nadia had passed away years ago in deep depression, and her death had always been a source of pain for the protagonist. She had always worried about what had happened to her sister after she died, as church teachings had led her to believe that those who take their own lives might not reach heaven. But now, seeing Nadia standing there, glowing like an angel, her heart was at ease. Nadia smiled at her, a light from her body spreading throughout the space. She told the protagonist that everything was fine, that she had been taken care of by God and was in a place of peace. The joy and tranquility enveloped both sisters, and the protagonist felt as if she had been freed from all worry and pain. While they were talking, the protagonist asked Nadia what it was like to be with God. Nadia simply smiled and said, "With God, everything becomes even better." This statement left the protagonist in disbelief. She wondered how anything could be better when the current feeling was already so perfect. But Nadia just smiled, and her eyes said everything. The two sisters continued walking in the green, serene space, laughing together and reminiscing about old memories. Felt like they had returned to their childhood when they used to play under the sunlight. The feeling couldn't be expressed in words, only felt in the heart. But then their journey had to pause when they encountered their father. Her father appeared as a body of light, with a gentle smile and a tender gaze. He had died in a horrific car accident many years ago. The memory of his death had always haunted her. But now, seeing him in such a peaceful and radiant state, all the past pain seemed to vanish. They didn't need to say much. Just standing next to each other, feeling each other's presence, enough. All memories of his painful death dissolved, leaving only peace. She knew that her father had found his eternal place and that he was now in the embrace of God. This encounter changed everything she had ever thought about life after death. Instead of a place filled with darkness and suffering, the heaven she saw was a place of light and love, where loved ones were reunited, and there was no sense of sorrow or loss. As the meeting came to an end, Nadia led her back down the path where they had started. But instead of returning to earthly life, she was led to another room, where she met a revered priest who had passed away many years ago. This priest, although she had only known him through stories and books, appeared before her with vivid presence. He sat in a large chair, majestic yet filled with humility and kindness. He looked at her with loving eyes and asked, "Where have you been for so long?" That question stirred something deep inside her, as though she had been away from something important throughout her life. She didn't know how to respond, but the priest continued, "You've been seeking love and compassion in the wrong places. God has always been here, waiting for you." That statement felt like a ray of light, illuminating her heart, making her realize that all the suffering and trials she had endured were part of her journey back to God. Although she had been lost and sought meaning in the wrong places, God had always kept his arms open, waiting for her to return. But just as she felt ready to stay with the priest and her loved ones, the priest said, "It's time for you to return. God has chosen you to be his messenger. Go and share what you have seen." Those words left her stunned. She didn't want to leave heaven, but she understood that her mission was not yet over. Immediately, everything began to fade, and she felt herself returning to her earthly body. When she opened her eyes, she saw Sam lying next to her, but this time, she felt stronger than ever. Although she was still paralyzed and couldn't move, she knew that her soul had been strengthened to face all the challenges in life. After undergoing an extraordinary spiritual journey and returning to the present world, the protagonist felt as if she had been spiritually reborn. Although her body remained motionless and weak, her spirit was stronger than ever. All the physical and emotional suffering she had endured seemed to be washed away by this experience, and she knew that she had to continue living and fulfill the mission God had entrusted to her. Sam, the husband who had caused her so much pain and torment, was still by her side when she woke up. But this time, she no longer felt fear or helplessness. She felt peaceful and more confident because she knew that God was with her, and she was protected from all evil. Sam didn't immediately notice the change in her, but she knew that the divine presence she sensed would protect her from further harm. That day, when Sam left the house to go to work, she had quiet time to reflect on everything that had happened. Although she was still paralyzed and unable to move, she no longer felt fear or pain. The near-death experience had changed the way she viewed the world, and now she understood that there were things beyond human control, and the challenges she faced were only temporary. She recalled her conversations with the Holy Spirit and the promises He had given her that she would return to become God's messenger. This gave her a sense of purpose, knowing that her life wasn't meaningless, and that all the suffering and trials she had endured had a purpose. She knew she would have to overcome the obstacles ahead to fulfill this mission, but she was no longer afraid or hesitant. She began to pray daily, not just for protection, but also for guidance on her next steps. Each prayer brought her peace and a sense that she wasn't alone on this journey. The divine visions of her deceased loved ones and the encounter with the Holy Spirit remained vivid in her mind, becoming a powerful source of motivation to keep going. In the weeks that followed, she faced new challenges. Sam, the husband she once loved, began to show frustration with her health condition. Grew increasingly irritated that she couldn't care for herself, becoming more distant and cold. Although Sam was no longer physically violent, the emotional gap between them widened. One day, Sam could no longer hide his anger. After a tiring day at work, he came home and yelled at her for being unable to do anything on her own and for relying on him too much. But this time, his harsh words didn't hurt her. She knew her spirit was stronger than that, and that God would not abandon her. In his rage, Sam decided to leave her, saying that he was leaving for good. He packed his belongings and left that night, leaving her alone. For many, this situation might have been a great shock and terrifying. But for her, it was a moment of liberation. She no longer felt trapped in a painful marriage. Instead, she felt relieved and free, knowing that God had protected her. After Sam left, she focused all her energy on healing and seeking guidance from God. She felt that this was the time for her to truly face greater things in her life. No longer bound by the traumas of the past, she began to explore her spiritual abilities and search for deeper meaning in what she had experienced. She remembered the visions of her mother, father, and sister who had passed away. They had shown her that life didn't end with death, and that every soul had a mission in this life. This made her reflect on her own mission. Was her journey meant to end here, or was there more she had to accomplish? One morning, while meditating and praying, she felt the powerful presence of the Holy Spirit in the room. A gentle light surrounded her, and she heard His voice once again. He told her that it was time for her to stand up and act, that her mission was to bring light and faith to those around her, especially to those who had lost their faith in God and life. The Holy Spirit's guidance filled her with more determination than ever. Although her body hadn't fully recovered, her spirit had grown so strong that nothing could stop her. She decided not to remain idle anymore and began reaching out to family, friends, and even strangers to share her story. The story of her near-death experience, the divine visions, and the Holy Spirit's intervention became a source of inspiration for many people. People began to listen to her, not only because her story was unique, but because they could feel the sincerity and love in her words. Those who had lost faith began to feel hope again. They saw that if she could overcome such terrifying challenges and still hold on to her faith, then they too could do the same. Conversations she had with others became opportunities for her to share important lessons about life, love, and the sacrifice of Jesus. She no longer saw herself as a victim of circumstance, but as a guide, a messenger, bringing faith and hope to others. As time passed, her health slowly began to improve. Although the recovery process wasn't fast, she felt that patience and faith in God would help her overcome any obstacle. She started to regain some movement, and with each small step forward, she felt herself moving closer to fulfilling the mission God had given her. During this healing process, she realized that her mission wasn't just to share her own story, but also to help others on their spiritual journeys. She began reaching out to charitable organizations, churches, and communities to assist those in need. Her efforts extended beyond sharing faith. She sought to provide practical help to those who needed it most. After gradually recovering and finding peace in her spirit, the protagonist knew she was nearing the completion of her mission. The Holy Spirit had once told her that she would return to become His messenger, and now she was ready for that task. Although her body was not fully healed, her strong spirit and faith had guided her throughout this journey. In recent times, she had focused on sharing her story with those around her, bringing hope to people who had lost faith in life and religion. However, she understood that her mission was not just about helping individuals, something greater, bringing change to an entire community. With determination and strong faith, she decided to spread her message even further. She began reaching out to religious leaders in her area, sharing her experiences with them, and seeking ways to collaborate in helping more people. Some were initially skeptical, but after hearing her story and feeling the sincerity in her words, they started to open up. She joined charitable programs, visited the sick, and continually shared the valuable lessons she had learned from her encounter with God. Her story wasn't just about the pain she had endured, but also about love, forgiveness, and a strong faith in God's power. People began to see her as a source of inspiration, a shining example of perseverance and unwavering belief. Everyone who met her felt a change in their own hearts after each conversation. One day, she received an invitation to share her story at a large church in the city. This was a great opportunity for her to reach a wider audience and bring faith to even more people. Although she felt a bit nervous since it was her first time speaking to such a large crowd, she knew this was what God had planned for her. That day, as she stepped onto the podium, she felt God's presence in every breath. She looked out at the crowd, seeing hundreds of eyes waiting, eager to hear her story. With no fear or doubt, she began recounting her experiences, from the physical pain and torment from her husband to the sacred moments when the Holy Spirit guided her and helped her overcome every trial. She spoke about her near-death journey, the vision she had of her parents, her sister Nadia, and Jesus. She shared how she found peace in her soul, even in the darkest moments, and how God had given her the strength to forgive and love even those who had hurt. Her words echoed through the quiet space of the church. Everyone listened intently. Many in the crowd had faced their own challenges, loss, suffering, and even doubts about God's presence in their lives. But through her story, they felt inspired and found renewed hope. Tears began to fall on many faces, not out of sadness, but because they felt comforted and strengthened by her words. After the talk, many people came to thank her and share their own story. They spoke of the pain they had endured, the despair they had felt, and how her story had given them the courage to face their own trial. The protagonist felt this was what she had been called to do, not just to share her story, but to listen and walk alongside those seeking peace in their lives. As time went on, her contributions expanded beyond speaking at churches. she became involved in various community activities. She helped the homeless, supported victims of domestic violence, and especially women who had experienced abuse like she had. She realized that her mission wasn't just to bring faith, to bring tangible and positive changes in people's lives. Her story gradually spread further, not just within her region, but also through the media. She was invited to interviews and shared her story with audiences nationwide. Many people sent letters thanking her, saying they had found the strength to keep living and to fight through life's challenges because of her inspiring word. Eventually, the protagonist realized that her mission didn't have a clear end. It was a continuous journey where she kept seeking and sharing God's love with others. Each day she felt grateful for the experiences she had, even the painful ones, because they had shaped her into the person she was today. In the peaceful moments of life, she often thought about the visions she had during her near-death experience. The images of her parents, her sister Nadia, and Jesus remained like an eternal source of encouragement. She knew that when her time on earth came to an end, she would be reunited with them in a place of peace and light. But until then, there was still much work to be done. She would continue walking the path God had chosen for her, bringing faith, hope, and love to those around her. Although her journey had been filled with suffering, in the end, she had found the true meaning of life, to serve others and live with absolute faith in God's.